So negative 4x squared plus x squared will give us this 3x squared here. So today we are going to be diving straight into cubic functions. So we are going to be factorizing cubic function and plotting a cubic function graph. The first thing we are going to learn is how to find the y-intersection of the graph. And then the second thing is going to be how to find your x-intersection of the graph using the synthetic division. And then we are going to be finding the turning points of the graph. Remember, the turning points are where your gradient of the graph is equal to 0. Meaning here it's the change of the movement. If your graph was moving positive, now it will change into the negative shape. And then we are going to be learning how to find point of inflection. So the point of inflection is simply the change of graph. So where your graph now start to change your shape is your point of inflection. So the point of inflection is second derivative, meaning the derivative of the derivative. So for the first time when we derive, we are finding the gradient of a graph. The second time when we derive the gradient of the graph, we are now doing what? Finding the point of inflection. We are going to equate our gradient, of which is the first derivative, to 0 and find our point of inflection. So if you find that your point of inflection is greater than 0, meaning you are going to have this type of shape, a smiley one. And then if you find that your point of inflection is less than 0, you are going to have this set shape graph. So this x value on the graph here is the point of inflection. So let's say we are given x cubed minus 3x squared, and we are required to find the y-intercept, x-intercept, turning point, point of inflection, and plot the graph. So the first thing we are going to do is to find your y-interception. So you're going to simply write your f of x and then equate it to 0, and then substitute x with 0, and then our y-interception will be 4. Okay, the first thing I want to show you is how to factorize a cubic function. Not only that you'll know how to factorize, but it will help you how to plot a graph, because it is the essential part of finding your x-interception of the graph. So there's no way you can find the x-interception without knowing how to factorize a cubic function. So don't worry, I got you. Let me show you how to factorize a cubic function. Therefore, we'll then learn how to plot a cubic function graph, finding the turning points and the inflection point. So let's say you're given x cubed minus 3x squared plus 4 equal to 0. And then we are required to find the x-interception of the graph, or we are required to plot a graph. Obviously, you cannot plot a graph without knowing your x-interceptions. So this function here, you can see our a is positive. If we were to plot a graph, we already know that it should be a positive graph from that a here, which will look like this right here. And therefore, the first thing we are going to do when factorizing a cubic function, we are going to try and error to find the first x-intercept, which will be our first x factor. So we are going to try -1 and 1, and then we are going to try -2 and 2, -3 and 3, -4 and 4, -5 and 5, up until we find the right factor that fits our equation. And therefore, okay, you can try it out, and then from here we find that our factor is x plus 1. So when finding a factor, you substitute your 1 here on the equation and make sure that the answer you get, because we have equated this to 0, it simply means that the answer we get here should be equal to 0. So try up until we find the number that fits our equation to make it true. Therefore, since we find that when we put -1, we get 0, meaning our x plus 1 is our factor. And then we are going to open our second bracket, and therefore, to find the first term, ask yourself, which term can I multiply with x to get x cubed? The answer is obviously x squared. And then for the last term, you check which number I can multiply with 1 to find my last term, which will be 4. And then to find the middle term, remember we want that negative 3. And then I already have this negative x squared from this positive 1 times x squared, which will give me x squared. And therefore, I want negative 3x squared, meaning make this true, we should add negative 4x squared. So since we have x squared, to find negative 3x, we will do what? We will add negative 4x squared. So negative 4x squared plus negative x squared will give us negative 3x squared. Then this holds our equation to be true. Okay, from here we can simply factorize our second bracket, and we can see that we will have x minus 2 into x minus 2, because these two, when we multiply, they should give us positive 4, and then negative 2 plus negative 2 will give us negative 4, and then x times x will give us x squared. And then from here we can see that our x-intercept will be negative 1 to 0 and 2 is to 0. That's where our graph intercept the x-axis. And then from here we can simply find the turning points and the points of inflation very easy, because we know that finding turning point we use the derivative, and then finding the inflation we use the derivative of the derivative. So we derive from what we have found when deriving our first equation. It's called the second derivative when finding an inflation of a graph.